I'd have to look at that report to comment on the merits of it. I think most people around the world recognize the United States of America is a great place to do business. It's a beautiful place to visit, and they should certainly come here because it's a much safer country than it was 4 years ago under the previous president. Libby.
Anyone who watches this show knows that I have a special bit of hate in my heart for Carolyn Leavitt. And it's not just because she is a liar, that is her job, and she works for Donald Trump. So of course she's going to lie. It's just that she's so bad at it, and it's so blatantly obvious, and when she's caught or called out in those lies, she melts down so quickly. And we saw that today when she was confronted over this ridiculous lie that the White House is pushing in defense of Pete Hegseth that we are going to get into, and of course Carolyn Leavitt's awful reaction. But before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already, and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button. It goes a long way. And it really does mean a lot to me now. Before we can get into the question Carolyn was confronted on, we have to see how this White House briefing started with a Republican propaganda campaign.
Many of the news organizations that are represented in this room have marched in lockstep on false narratives, such as the Very Fine People hoax, the Covington smear, and now what's being called the Maryland Man hoax, where an MS-13 gang member adjudicated by 2 different judges, I believe, is just simply being referred to as a Maryland man over and over again. Now, in an effort from the White House to expand access to new companies, you've created this new media seat. So I'm wondering if you can comment on, following this expansion, you've had numerous outlets disparage the companies that you've had sit here, as well as the reporters. I'm wondering if you could comment on the unprofessional behavior, as well as elaborate if there's any plans to expand access to new companies.
Sure. Well, we certainly welcome diverse viewpoints in this room, which is one of the...
So that was Tim Pool, a conservative podcaster, notably not in a suit, which I guess we're no longer expected to care about. He wears a beanie, likely due to baldness, but the issue isn't being bald, it's being ashamed of it. Still, the real concern here is much bigger. The White House is installing its own media mouthpieces. The people seated are from traditional media outlets, but those lined up along the walls, they're conservative content creators from platforms like YouTube, TikTok, or Snapchat, handpicked by the White House to push propaganda and lob softball questions to Carolyn Leavitt. You can see the pattern every time she calls on them. And yet, Tim Pool has the nerve to claim mainstream media is the one spreading lies. In reality, it's conservative outlets that parrot talking points straight from the White House or Mike Johnson's office. And let's not ignore that Tim Pool reportedly receives hundreds of thousands of dollars a month from Russian sources to push their agenda. That's why he's lying about Abrao Garcia. This isn't even a question of Garcia's character. It's about his right to due process, a right every person is entitled to. Tim Pool doesn't seem to care about that, and neither does Carolyn Leavitt, who just made a very polished show of ignoring the American people.
In other news, the Trump administration has announced we will put an end to Joe Biden's illegal student loan bailout attempts. No student loan has been referred to collection since March of 2020. That comes to an end. On May 5th, the Department of Education will resume involuntary collections for borrowers with defaulted federal student loans. The student loan portfolio controlled by the federal government is nearly $1.6 trillion, but fewer than 4 out of 10 borrowers are in repayment. This is unsustainable, unfair, and a huge liability for American taxpayers. Debt cannot be wiped away. It just ends up getting transferred to others. So why should Americans who didn't go to college or went to college and responsibly paid back their loans pay for the student loans of other Americans? The Trump administration will never force taxpayers to pay student loan debts that don't belong to them. Student loan borrowers need clarity, and we're finally giving it to them. Borrowers will now be clearly expected to repay their loans, and those who default on their loan obligations will face involuntary collections. The government can and will collect defaulted federal student loan debt by withholding money from borrowers' tax refunds, federal pensions, and even their wages. America is $36 trillion in debt. We must get our fiscal house in order and restore common sense to our country. If you take out a loan, you have to pay it back. It's very simple. President Trump will not kick the can down the road anymore.
Student loan payments, bringing them back the White House of lowering costs and making it easier for working Americans. Great job, guys. Real fantastic stuff. Well, we're not going back to the policy of protecting people against predatory loans and, making sure that people aren't under the crushing weight of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of loans that prevent people from starting small businesses that employ the overwhelming majority of Americans. No, we're not doing that. This administration is a joke, and it continued to be when Carolyn LEAVITT spewed this nonsensical lie about Pete Hegseth and what's really going on at the Pentagon.
I really appreciate it. I have two questions, one on the Pentagon and another on the economy. You said on Fox News that the entire Pentagon is working against Secretary Hegseth, but the people who were fired were Hegseth's own guys. So how do you square that, and what do you say to concerns that that's bad management?
They were Pentagon employees who leaked against their boss to news agencies in this room, and it's been clear since day one from this administration that we are not going to tolerate individuals who leak to the mainstream media, particularly when it comes to sensitive information. And the Secretary of Defense is doing a tremendous job, and he is bringing monumental change to the Pentagon. And there's a lot of people in this city who reject monumental change, and I think, frankly, that's why we've seen a smear campaign against the Secretary of Defense since the moment that President Trump announced his nomination before the United States Senate. Let me reiterate, the President stands strongly behind Secretary Hegseth and the change that he is bringing to the Pentagon, and the results that he's achieved thus far speak for themselves.
Is there an FBI investigation?
Now, I assumed when the story first broke that the firings that had happened earlier in the week were connected to these stories coming out about Pete Hegseth incompetence and this second signal chat that was revealed. I assumed that it was because Pete Hegseth had fired folks at the Pentagon with no just cause, that they were, I don't want to say lashing out, but sharing what was actually happening there. And it doesn't matter if they're disgruntled or not, if they're telling the truth, which they are, and their reason for doing so isn't what Carolyn LEAVITT wants to suggest, that everyone at the Pentagon is turning against Pete Hegs in the administration. Somehow, these are his buddies that he brought in. They just recognize that he is that incompetent. They are on the record saying they are doing this. They are speaking out. They are bringing up the second signal Chad and the rest of the chaos at the Pentagon, which, by the way, there is more to come. They're doing it because they think Pete Hegseth is embarrassing, Donald Trump and the rest of the administration, not their statements, right? They're trying to play the inverse that's not true. It is Pete Hegseth who is the problem. Caroline Leavitt clearly doesn't recognize that she also doesn't recognize the chaos that her boss is causing, which was called out right here.
I'll have to ask him, and I'll get back to you, Phil.
Thank you, Caroline.
You're welcome. John.
Thanks a lot, Caroline. Some economic questions for you. Kevin Hassett has been a key economic advisor to the president in both of his terms. In 2022...
And he still is.
And he still is.
He was just in my office.
Absolutely. In 2022, he said that the independence of the Fed is super important. That's a direct quote. Is that something that the president subscribes to? Does he still believe in the independence of the Federal Reserve?
Well, look, I think the president has made his position on the Fed and on Powell quite clear. The president believes that they have been making moves and taking action in the name of politics rather in the name of what's right for the American economy. The president has the right to express his displeasure with the Fed, and he has the right to say he believes interest rates should be lower. He believes Americans should be able to borrow money cheaper than they currently are right now. And I also spoke to Kevin Hassett about the Fed as well, and he has called into question the Fed's independence and whether they are actually doing things, again, out of the best interest of the economy, or are they doing it for partisan reasons. The president wants to see interest rates lower. He has made that quite clear.
We've also seen,
Sure.
if I may, I'm sorry, one more, Caroline, just about, I said two economic questions, about the dollar. We've seen seen the dollar at multi-year lows versus the euro and other currencies around the world. Is it the administration's policy for a strong dollar? How does it view the dollar versus other currencies around the world?
The president wants to see the dollar remain as the world's reserve currency for our long-term fiscal stability and our economic growth. He's been quite clear about that.
Every economic action taken by Donald Trump further destabilizes our country, our currency, the markets. But a move to fire Jerome Powell could be the most damaging yet. And it clearly shows that Trump doesn't understand why, or just maybe that he doesn't care, or it's all about power for him. All of those things could be very true, but for an explanation why this might be the most damaging economic move Donald Trump does so far, and that is a big statement. I want to hear from our friends at MSNBC.
There are unanswered legal questions surrounding whether Trump can fire Jerome Powell. Most people think he can't. The Atlantic points out, quote, if Trump bullies the Fed into a new policy decision by firing Powell and installing a crony in the central bank, investors around the world will dump even more American assets and flee to the relative safety of the euro, raising domestic borrowing costs as the central bank scrambles to shore up the financial system and tries to bring interest rates down. It would be chaos, with costs extending into the trillions of dollars and ramifications felt for decades, end quote. People close to Donald Trump tell the New York Times today that, quote, Mr. Trump's advisors have repeatedly told him that firing Mr. Powell was both legally and financially fraught, and that the uncertainty could cause a significant downturn in financial markets. Mr. Trump, at least for the moment, has seemed persuaded, the People said. When asked about firing Jerome Powell today, White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett told reporters the Trump administration will continue to study the matter. Joining us now is Robert Reich, who served as Secretary of Labor under the President Bill Clinton. He's a professor of public policy at UC Berkeley. He's the co-founder of Inequality Media, which means he's sort of a important, august fellow. And I don't normally drag him into the pigsty with me, but you're coming into the pigsty with me right now, Bob, because the Wall Street Journal has just written something which I find very funny. It talks about the fact that on April 9th, as markets were melting down, the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick took advantage of the fact that Peter Navarro, who seems to be the mastermind behind these tariffs, was at a meeting with Kevin Hassett. So he was away from the Oval Office for a few minutes, and they went in and caused him to write this Truth Social post and pause the tariffs. I mean, ridiculous if true, quite possibly true. But you got this guy, Peter Navarro, an economist they got off of Amazon, literally, who is dictating these policies. You got Howard Lutnick. No credit to him, because anything Donald Trump wants, he goes on TV and parrots, while the global economy is in danger of melting down.
Yeah, Ali, you're getting at something that is really, I think historians looking back on this period will highlight, and that is that the chaos is self-induced. Yep. The chaos is not chaos that really comes from something like, a pandemic. Right. The chaos is right there inside Donald Trump's White House. It's in this Trump regime. They can't get their act together. They are, the kinds of, I have been in White Houses. I have seen government up close. I've seen presidents up close. You don't have this kind of craziness, and it itself creates market uncertainty. If you are a CEO, if you are somebody who is contemplating making major investments in a new factory or whatever, you're not going to do it with this kind of uncertainty, this kind of chaos, this kind of, just everybody inside the White House looking for the moment that they can actually get Trump alone.
It is all about the consolidation of power for Donald Trump. He doesn't care what it takes or what he breaks to make it happen. And this move could be the most damaging of them all. They don't seem to care, though it is all about Donald Trump being the dictator he promised to be. None of these actions will help regular people. This idea that Donald Trump is somehow crashing the stock market to lower interest rates when in fact the opposite has happened. because he has destabilized our country so much that people are not buying bonds. People cannot trust our currency. People cannot trust. Donald Trump goes to show that this downplaying of the chaos of the administration that Republicans simply chalked up to mean tweets. Yeah, it does have tangible impacts on your life. It's not just angry words spouted by a lunatic. Those words reverberate into a devastating economic crash. That's what we're looking at. And that's what we gotta call out on this show every single day. And if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video, and if you stuck around to the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. And until next time, I'll see you soon.